I have some good news, Mr. Leach. The board is coming around to our story. Sales are lining up, and there's so much here they have to act on.
Thank God.
We've even managed to find information on who this man was as a child.
Who is he? Why does he do this?
1963. It all began.
So Rob Zombie's Halloween tells the story of young Michael Myers while he is enduring some insane living conditions, creating him into the psychopathic shape that we know and love, as well as telling the story of Smith's Grove, how he escaped, and eventually getting into his showdown with Laurie Strode. Well, welcome everybody to the Rob Zombie section of the Halloween franchise. One of the most hate-fueled, argumentative, divisive sections of this entire franchise. So I can't wait to place my feet in the sand and put my opinions out there. This is gonna be fun. So Rob Zombie's Halloween remake came to us right thick in the middle of the remake craze in the mid to late 2000s, 2007, so I was still in high school. Still remember when this movie was announced. I was really nervous and excited because there was the two movies previous that I had seen by Rob Zombie, House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects. I did not like it all. Have yet to revisit those movies, so I'm curious what my thoughts are now. And when they announced that he was going to be doing it, I was scared that he was going to put too much of those movies in it, but at the same time I was very excited because the style that the trailers were showing and the direction that he was going, at least at the time, seemed like a really cool, unique way to remake the original film and a unique place to take this franchise. So opening night comes, me and my dad go to the theater, we sit down, we both have the exact same fears but the exact same excitements with the movie we are about to watch. The screen comes up, Halloween, boom, the title sequence, and then we get Rob Zombie's dialogue smeared into our face. And so begins the problems with Rob Zombie's Halloween. But before I get to all that, let's talk about the things that I actually do like about Rob Zombie's Halloween that I have liked since the first time that I saw it. And one of the strange things about this movie is every single time that I rewatch it, which has probably been 5 times or so since 2007, the things that I like about this movie, I like more every single time that I watch it. But the things that I don't like, I fucking hate by the time I've watched it the 4th or 5th time. But the good things about Rob Zombie's Halloween. First and foremost, I have said this numerous times, Rob Zombie is not the worst director out there. I wouldn't even say that he is in the conversation for worst directors out there. What he is far and away the most frustrating fucking director that I have ever watched a film by. And that's because there are some things that he does horribly wrong that he refuses to budge on, but there are some things that he gets so right that it frustrates the shit out of you why you can't harness the good energy of this and block out all the bad shit that everybody keeps telling you fuck up in every single movie. And one of those things that he harnesses very well in Rob Zombie's Halloween is the camera work. The camera work, the way that he sets up shots, the way that he frames certain shots, the different camera styles that he uses in the 3 acts of this movie, the way that he visually tells the story of his version of Michael Myers and Halloween. It's great. The camera work by this guy is awesome in this movie. The way that the first act of the movie is kind of more handheld, a little bit grittier, you know, a little bit more in your face and moves around a lot more. Some would say shaky, but I think it's just a shutter effect that he puts in a couple of scenes. There's really not a whole lot of shaky cam in this, at least in the theatrical cut, the one that I prefer to watch. You get to the second act of the movie that's mostly in Smith's Grove, and because it's in a hospital psychiatric environment, the camera is fixated. And it never moves. It's almost like CCTV footage in a way, the way that they shoot the second act. And then you get into the third act of this movie, and it's shot a lot more traditional, like your traditional slasher or horror film. There's a lot of different cameras, a lot of different camera movements, cranes, different apparatuses that he uses, and it's just cool how each act of this movie kind of has its own flavor just because of the way that Zombie moves the camera around. And there's a lot of really good, interesting, and creepy, kind of demented shots in this movie that work well. I mean, kind of going through chronologically, you got like the shot at the beginning whenever Myers is killing his sister Judith, and he's following her down the hallway, and it kind of, the camera's a little bit guerrilla the way that it moves, and it's kind of following from right before her POV, and he's kind of in the background, and he's cutting her up a little bit by little, and especially by the way that that actress kind of portrays the pain of that scene. Very creepy the way that that all kind of unfolds. You get into the Smith's Grove, and one of the cooler scenes, I think, is when Danny Trejo's character is killed, where you go back and forth from the shots of Michael pulling him up for air, pushing him back down into this vat of water, and then the camera is fixated inside the sink or whatever the hell was holding that water, and he's just inside of, and blood's coming out, and it goes back and forth, and it kind of makes you live out that death to an uncomfortable length. And then you get into the third act, and there's a lot of cool kind of recreations of some of John Carpenter's scenes in the original film that just have its own little gritty flavor to it just because of the way that Rob Zombie frames shots and everything. So I do think the way that he shoots this movie is one of the best things about it. Moving on from that, which is probably one of the most important things that he had to get right, and I do think that he gets right, is Michael Myers himself. I think that Tyler Mane is probably the most brutal, vicious, and arguably scariest versions of Michael Myers as far as intimidation factor goes. You know, there's the supernatural element of the original John Carpenter Michael Myers that is never going to be topped as far as scary, but if I was to pick like which Michael Myers I wanted chasing me down the street, Tyler Mane would probably be at the bottom of that list, because that dude just looks like he would just break you in half with a look. And his version of Myers is just in your face, violent as hell. And of course you're gonna get that in a Rob Zombie movie, but I like that different take on Michael Myers, and I like the way that Tyler Mane portrays this huge hulking version of Myers. And going along with that is the look of Myers. I think that the mask in this movie might be my favorite after the original. Goes back and forth between this and Halloween 6 because that mask is very good as well, but I love the recreation of the William Shatner mask, and especially in the third act of the movie when he digs the mask up and it's a little bit more scarred and weathered. I like that look too. So the look of Myers, the way that the overalls look, where it's a little bit more dingy, and the look of the mask especially, a great look for Michael Myers. And dare I say this, I think Sheri Moon Zombie is actually pretty decent in this movie. She's not a huge highlight by any means. Certainly think there was much better actresses out there that could have played the role of Michael Myers' mother, but I think that for all the times that I've seen Sheri Moon Zombie, even in movies where she is the main star, like The Lords of Salem, there's moments in her performance in this movie, especially when she's kind of showing the grieving mother or the shock of what Michael is doing, that she's actually pretty capable. So I will give credit where credit is due. I wouldn't have cast her myself, but I know that she's required in the contract somewhere where Rob Zombie makes a film, she has to play a character. I think that she did much better in this movie than I've seen her do in any of the other movies that Rob Zombie has made. I mean, you look through the cast here, you've got Ken Faree playing Joe Grizzly, bitch.
Let me introduce myself. I'm Joe Grizzly, bitch.
You've got Dee Wallace, you've got Bill Moseley in the theatrical cut at least. So many actors that you will pick and be like, oh my God, that's so-and-so from that. Oh, and that's the dude from Texas Chainsaw 2. That's the chick from Cujo. And it's great because they're not only good in their roles because they're good at playing these little smaller supporting Rob Zombie characters, but it just kind of brings along a little bit more fun for the ride. Or even when you're in the brutal scenes that is chocked, this movie's chocked full of them. So much brutality, but then you get to see somebody from a movie that you love from years ago and you're like, ah, cool, they're in this. It just brings a little bit more of an enjoyment factor to his movies that he's always able to nail down these classic horror actors, and they always seem to be very excited to be in his movies, so gotta love that. And being a rocker metalhead like I am, I also have to give credit where credit is due, which is also something that I usually would expect Rob Zombie would do well since he's in the industry, is a great soundtrack. You get so many classic songs in this. You got Kiss, you've got Alice Cooper, you got Blue Oyster Cult. I mean, every single time a song plays in this movie, whether it makes sense that it's playing in modern times or not, I love it. Whenever I hear it, I just want to sing along. Even if somebody's getting murdered, I'm like, yeah, God of Thunder. And despite its problems, and despite how much farther he takes it, even in times when he doesn't really need to take it that far, I do appreciate the variety in the kills in this. For a slasher movie, I actually think this movie is somewhat underrated with the variety of kills, because that's one of the biggest things that I bitch about time and time again with slasher movies. If you've seen my Scream reviews, you heard me say it every single time when I put a Scream review out. Variety, 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 variety is the spice of death. When you have like 55 different ways that Michael kills somebody in one movie, that is awesome. Even if it goes a little too far, doesn't matter. If you're just having Michael stab somebody or choke 18 people in the movie over and over again, to me, that's not showing so much creativity. So when you get into this, when you get Michael beating somebody with a bat, stabbing somebody in the face, slitting somebody's throat, drowning somebody, throwing a TV into their face, snapping somebody's neck, slamming them against the wall, it's so many different ways that Michael unleashes this brutality that, to me, if you're into that carnage candy, trademark, this movie delivers with that. All right, is that enough positives? Judge's ruling? It is. Okay, now let's talk about the bullshit. The opening of this movie, the first 30 minutes, maybe even 40 minutes, I don't know, maybe I'm being generous. The first act of this movie, the entirety of the opening, the first scene, worst offender, fucking unwatchable. I've said it before, I will say it again until he learns. Rob Zombie, you might be a great director, but you are a fucking horrible writer. Stop writing your own movies, or at least let somebody tap you on the fucking shoulder and say, maybe we shouldn't put 18 fucks and cunts in the first 5 minutes of this movie. Might turn some people off. I mean, Jesus Christ, people. Like, when I go back to the experience I had in the theater watching this movie for the first time, when me and my father sat down having the same excitement for what could be, but the same fears for what we know Rob Zombie has already done, and the opening scene of this movie comes on, once God of Thunder is out of the way, and we get into William Forsythe's character of Ronnie, and you got Sherry Moon Zombie, and you get fucking Judith and White Trash Michael, and everybody's hanging out in this little Rob Zombie world. Oh my God, I have not slumped down in my fucking seat in the theater so fast watching a film. I mean, like the first 20 lines of dialogue are abysmal. I'm gonna crawl over there and skull fuck the shit out of you. Crying shit, crying shit. I'll just bust my spunk all over them floppy ass tits. God damn, your daughter's got a nice little dumper, you jealous of your daughter's ass? You're talking about your stepdaughter, you disgusting fucking pig. And I like William Forsythe. But goddamn, this is what happens when you let Rob Zombie write his own dialogue. I know what he was trying to do. He was trying to paint this picture of this horrible upbringing, this horrible home life to kind of facilitate the creation of the psychopath in Michael Myers. But goddamn, Rob, look up one word for me: subtlety. Things are always creepier when you don't have the answer, when you don't have a direct line to the psychopath, when you have a Ted Bundy or a John Wayne Gacy that everybody swore was this normal, great, loving human being, and there was this dark side that nobody knows why, nobody knows where it came from, and nobody knows how to explain it. Which is problem number one with the approach you took with this movie, but we all gave you a shot and said, okay, you want to tell us how Michael Myers became Michael Myers? Don't fuck this up. And you had to smear your fucking dialogue all over our faces like a shitty diaper. I mean, you watch the opening 5 minutes of this movie and you're like, well, no fucking shit, he became a serial killer. And unfortunately, that bad writing, that bad dialogue, that white trashiness, that disgusting version of humanity that Rob Zombie is obsessed with just pumping in his movie, it's all throughout the fucking runtime of Rob Zombie's Halloween. It lessens as the movie goes on. The opening scene is certainly kind of getting most of it out of his system, but still, it's sprinkled throughout. every 10 to 12 minutes of the runtime of this movie to the point where you're like, stop, it doesn't belong here, stop forcing it. I mean, when Michael Myers, the epitome of evil, the shape, the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes, the evil incarnate, when that character is like the 15th worst character in this movie as far as morals and humanity goes, you got a fucking problem.
Oh, and I heard your sister got caught selling blowjobs in the bathroom. I heard they had to pump the cum out of her stomach. Hey, Mikey, how's your mom doing? You know, my old man said that for $1 she'd rub her tits on his face. Shut up. What the fuck did you say, faggot? Mikey's upset.
But even beyond that opening scene and the characters at home in the Myers household, you get to the school, you get more disgusting characters bullying Michael Myers, which leads to this murder, the first kill of the movie, where he beats this kid to death for bullying him. And it's supposed to be one of those setups where this kid is so disgusting and such a vile human being and such one of those bullies that is so over the top in a movie that you want him to get his comeuppance, but by the time you get to the kill, it's filmed in such a brutal, dark, and gringy way that effect is lost. And now you're just watching this 15, 16-year-old kid get beaten to death slowly. And I know Rob Zombie likes you to feel uncomfortable, so maybe that's what he was going for and didn't really care whether or not you wanted the kid to die or not. Just an uncomfortable scene, and it's not a good opening kill. When you have a slasher movie, an opening kill is usually supposed to be either one of your moneymaker kills or at least something to just get you into the killer as your bad guy. But again, you're trying to humanize Michael by having this character that we want to die. All of it's wrong. All of it's wrong.
Please. Don't hurt me.
But then we get past all that shit. We move into the second act of the movie. We wave bye-bye to all the fucking William Forsythe skull fucking shit. And we get into the Smith's Grove section of this movie, which is what, honestly, as a fan of the original movie, out of curiosity, I was most interested in. Because I didn't really necessarily have a whole lot of curiosity about what made Michael the killer. But the sessions between Loomis and Michael about what conversations they had or failed to have, since Michael Myers is not supposed to talk unless you're in a Rob Zombie movie. All of that curiosity, I was waiting for somebody to show me their version of what went on. And unfortunately for me, the second act of this movie is extremely underwhelming as far as giving me that. You have a couple of sessions with Dr. Loomis and Michael. Some of them, Michael talks, and then you get to the point when Michael doesn't talk anymore. And they don't really give you a great motivation for why suddenly he snaps and doesn't talk anymore, but nonetheless. They don't really feel like sessions that would fill Loomis's mind with this fear, this certainty, this driven direction that Michael is evil incarnate. That this kid needs to be kept in this fucking Smith's Grove sanitarium for the rest of his life until he dies of old age, or we're all fucked. You never quite get that convincing scene in this movie where Loomis goes from caring psychologist trying to reach this kid that's endured a lot of hell and given a lot of hell back to the world, to suddenly fearing this as something that is less than human, something that is just pure evil. You never get that transition. And even getting down to the escape scene, 14 or 15 years later, whenever Michael is suddenly Tyler Mane huge and he's been there not talking for over a decade, and Loomis finally decides, I can't reach you, I have to retire or go work somewhere else. You get two different versions of this depending on if you watch the theatrical or the director's cut. And unfortunately, neither one of them are very good. You get one that is extremely horrible and ridiculous and so Rob Zombie forced that it is unwatchable. And you get the other one that's just kind of weak and uninspired. So pick your poison, I guess. You get the theatrical version where Michael simply just breaks his chains, beats the shit out of a couple of guards, and walks out of this sanitarium. And it's cool because you get to see Bill Moseley, but other than that, it's just too easy. It just seems like that should have been one of the main highlight scenes of your movie, and it feels like that version of it was kind of written on a Sunday when it was due on Monday. Now you get to the Rob Zombie's director's cut version, And again, this is why you don't let Rob Zombie write his own movies, because you get two scumbag sanitarium workers who come in with this whack job chick from the sanitarium and they start raping her in Michael Myers' cell. Because reasons. And then Michael gets pissed off, comes to save the day, which again, humanizing Michael Myers, big no-no, and then walks the fuck out of the sanitarium. So really the escape scenes on both fronts to me, big missed opportunity. But then we move into the third act, and I will say that the third act is certainly the best part of this movie. It's certainly the most watchable, and it certainly has most of this movie's redeeming qualities. There is still a con associated with this third act, in that it's basically a rushed Cliff Note version of the John Carpenter version of 1978. If you're gonna have a movie that is totally unique, that you're going for this wildly unique direction, it feels like a complete change of pace when suddenly, on a dime, you're out of Rob Zombie's version of Halloween and suddenly in this quickened version of the Halloween that you know and love. And it feels like that third act was almost like studio mandated somehow, because the tone, the way that Myers acts, the way that some of the dialogue shifts, it just feels like a totally different movie. Now, I prefer that version, but at the same time, it just doesn't flow quite as well. But you get into the third act, and you have some problems with Rob Zombie's writing as far as the characters, because not as bad as William Forsythe and all that nasty shit, but you get into the recreated characters of the John Carpenter's version, like Laurie Strode, Annie Brackett, Linda, and they're all watered down versions of the 1978 characters. Even Annie, who honestly is not that great of an actress in the original movie, you get to Danielle Harris, and while Danielle Harris is far and away a much better actress, what she's given to do in this movie makes her not as likable as a character, and you're not as invested in her. They correct that in Halloween 2, but you get this movie here, and Danielle Harris, Linda is just kind of a slut extreme version of her character in the original movie, where every single line of dialogue this chick has is just talking about snatch and, oh yeah, you want some of this, come and get it. And then she's fucking this nasty ass looking dude who blows his load inside of her, goes away to get a beer, and the first thing she does is call Laurie to say, hey, do you think I'm a slut? Survey says, yes. And even down to Laurie Strode herself. Now, I will say something somewhat controversial here. I think Scout Taylor Compton is a really good actress. I think that there is aspects of her character in this and certain scenes where she has to act where I actually think she's a better actress than Jamie Lee Curtis was in 1978 to a degree. But what Rob Zombie gives her to do makes her character a much less effective, much less memorable, and much less loved version of Laurie Strode, because she's basically reduced down to the first half of her story as her making these weird sexual jokes and kind of playing along with the sexually charged jokes of her two friends, and then suddenly she's screaming and wailing and running around crying and freaking the fuck out for the rest of the runtime. So you don't really get to know this version of Laurie at all. But let's get down to the big one as far as character goes. And this one is more on the mixed side than a con, but it certainly leans heavier on the con side, so I'm going to talk about it here, and that's just Malcolm McDowell's version of Dr. Loomis, which I do not blame him for. Again, I blame Rob Zombie, because this is the thing with the Loomis that we have in this movie. All of the opportunities that you had to have a different version of Loomis, to flesh out that character more, to flesh out the relationship between him and Myers more, to, you know, give us what we didn't have in that original series from Donald Pleasance's Loomis, and it's just kind of rushed. You don't really get that. They don't focus on that. They're focusing on how white trashy Michael Myers' upbringing is, and then they kind of skate past the sanitarium shit to get to the John Carpenter side of things. But when you get down to the third act, when Loomis really gets to have a lot more place in this story, it feels like they just take lines from the original Halloween. They give these iconic Loomis lines that Donald Pleasance brought to the world that we all know and love him for, and tell Malcolm McDowell, hey, say that shit. Worked in the first one, it's gonna work here. But it doesn't, because even though Malcolm McDowell is a very seasoned, beloved actor, and apparently he never watched the original John Carpenter's Halloween, so that he didn't really know what Donald Pleasance brought to this character and didn't accidentally replicate it, his versions of all these lines don't feel anywhere near as effective, as scary, or as well done as they did when Donald Pleasance said them. And they are fucking verbatim. I mean, if you're gonna go this route, at least give your Loomis something else to say. Make your Loomis be the one to convince Sheriff Brackett that Michael Myers' evil has come to your little town. Make all that stuff happen, but give him different lines of dialogue. Give him other ways to do it besides just copy and paste what worked in 1978. And honestly, I never really got that belief that Malcolm McDowell's version of Loomis truly feared Myers. You know, when you get the Donald Pleasance version, this guy believes Myers is fucking evil incarnate. Like, this thing moves with forces of evil. This is not a human, this is just blackness. And you believe that. Loomis is the one that makes you believe how evil and scary Michael Myers is. When you get into this one, it's almost like he sympathizes too much with Myers and he cares for him and he's trying to get him back to the sanitarium more than he's trying to stop him. Even though he buys this big fucking gun, you never believe like he's out to get Myers, like he's out to stop the evil. You just feel like he's there because the script requires him to be. And that also just kind of goes back to the writing. You know, when it gets to this Cliff Notes version of Halloween in the second half to the third act of this version of Halloween, it really feels like Rob Zombie didn't know how to recreate it without recreating it directly. There's things that's ripped directly from that movie, but there's also moments that he invents himself that feel like they don't even fit. It feels like you could delete that scene altogether and the movie would flow just along fine. I mean, supposedly he was writing a lot of shit on the day of shooting too, which is never a good sign for a movie. Very few movies out there that work can say that. We wrote the shit today and we filmed it today and it's awesome. Doesn't always work that way. In fact, it hardly ever works that way. So no surprise there. But overall, the big overarching negative with this movie, just to kind of wrap up everything, is the same overarching negative that wraps up pretty much every movie that I've ever seen by Rob Zombie, and that's the writing. The dude just cannot write. He can't write dialogue, most of all. He struggles with story. He can get a concept out there, he can get the visuals out there, he can bring a style to it, but he cannot write the journey. Somebody else needs to write his movies, or at least really fucking help him, look over his shoulder and tap him once in a while when he gets a little too crazy. But anyway, guys, even though I ranted for a very long time on this movie because it's one of the most frustrating viewing experiences in this franchise, and Rob Zombie is easily, for me, the most frustrating director that I ever have experience with, just because he does things so good, but he fucks up things that are just so crucial that he refuses to bend on. That, man, overall, I think this is a movie that is going to frustrate most people. I think that there are its fans, people that love Rob Zombie's style and they love his movies regardless of anything that I say. They're gonna love this. Fans of that original 1978 have already pretty much voiced their opinions. Pretty much all of them, for the most part, hate this one, or at least don't like it anywhere near as much as the original. So it's a movie that you kind of have to know who you are when you go into it. But I think there are enough redeeming factors in this. There is enough entertainment value in here. There's enough variety in the kills. There's enough coolness in the portrayal of Myers. There's enough there to grab onto, especially once you get out of that real icky first act of the movie, that it is a movie that I do, for the most part, about 60% enjoy whenever I rewatch it, despite all of the fucking problems and despite all of the fucking things that frustrate me about this movie. So it's still going to get by with a recommendation. But I will say this as a helpful hint. Watch the theatrical version. I have not rewatched the theatrical version since the theaters until I watched it in preparation for this review, and I have watched the director's cut every single time previous to about an hour ago when I watched the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut is so much better. It trims down the runtime just in small ways, but even small scenes when they just trim off little lines of dialogue, like the nurse in the scene whenever Myers kills her in the sanitarium and then decides not to talk anymore. The theatrical cut, all she does is say, "That's a cute baby," and puts the picture down, goes about the day reading her newspaper, and gets killed randomly, which is the way that Myers always works. In the director's cut, she makes this little shitty remark to Myers about being ugly and this baby could never be related to you, then turns around, and how the fuck did you not expect that psychotic little bastard to stab you in the neck with whatever he could find? So even just little scenes like that, especially taking out the rape scene, like little small subtle differences from the theatrical cut to the director's cut. I think the director's cut just highlights all of Rob Zombie's flaws, where the theatrical cut, you can tell an editor was taking some shit out here and there to make the movie a lot better. So watch this, but watch the theatrical cut. So if you're a fan of that original 1978 John Carpenter film and you maybe want to see some of the aspects of the story that John Carpenter chose not to show you, or if you're just a fan of Rob Zombie, you like his style, you like his filmmaking, and you don't care what anybody says, you think his movies are awesome, give this thing a shot. Just walk into it with very tempered expectations. Know who you are, know what your tastes are so you're not running away screaming after the first 5 minutes of dialogue, but give it a shot. No rush. Check it out on Netflix. So what do you guys think of Rob Zombie's Halloween? Are you on the end of the camp that thinks this is fucking abysmal? Or are you in the minority that thinks that this movie is awesome and don't get all the hate for it? Put your thoughts down below in the comment section and tell me what your thoughts leading into Halloween 2, which will be coming up right after this. And then we are done with this review series until Halloween 2018, baby. Put all your thoughts down below on Rob Zombie's Halloween, guys, and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. If you guys want to check out some social media links, check down below in the video description for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, my Spreadshirt store for awesome Cody Leach merchandise like t-shirt designs that you guys will eat up, and my Patreon page, which is a great way to give back to this channel, help this channel grow, and get cool exclusive content for your eyes only, such as the ability to choose reviews or top 5 videos or the topic of anything you want me to talk about. That's this patron-only privilege, as well as the Blu-ray digital copy codes for the movies that I buy almost every single week. I give all that away to my patrons, so that's another exclusive privilege that they have. Check that out, guys. And if you want to check out some more of my videos, like the rest of this Halloween review series leading up to Halloween 2018, you can check that shit out by clicking right over here.